kicked out by her daughter-in-law, but she was hiding a $2 million gold inheritance. Elizabeth Johnson clutched the worn leather suitcase tightly as silent tears streamed down her face. The door of her home slammed shut behind her with a bang that echoed in her ears like a final sentence. At 72, she never imagined she'd be thrown out by her own son from the house where she'd spent the last 15 years of her life. "You heard what she said, didn't you, Mom?" The voice of Jennifer, her daughter-in-law, still rang in her mind like a sharp knife. "I can't stand supporting a useless old woman who's nothing but an expense and contributes nothing." The cowardly silence of Michael, her only son, hurt more than any shout. He had stood there, frozen in the living room, staring at the floor while his wife tore his own mother's heart apart. Her grandchildren, Emily and Ethan, clung to each other on the stairs, crying and begging their grandma not to leave. "Grandma, don't go." Little Emily, just 8 years old, screamed. "Please, Mom, let Grandma stay." Ethan, 2 years older, pleaded. But Jennifer was merciless. She claimed Elizabeth's pension barely covered her own high blood pressure and diabetes medications, and that she had become a dead weight on the family. All those years, the elderly woman had taken care of the house, raised the grandchildren while the couple worked, cooked, cleaned, given unconditional love. Now that her strength wasn't what it used to be, and she needed more medical care, she was tossed aside like an old piece of furniture. Elizabeth walked through the streets of Greenwich Village in New York City, carrying only the essentials. The weight of rejection was heavier than the suitcase. Her trembling legs led her to the park, where she used to take her grandchildren to play. She sat on the same bench where she'd chatted with other grandmothers so many times, but now she was completely alone. The light March rain began to fall, dampening her neatly combed grey hair. She remembered when Michael was little and would run into her arms whenever it rained. Where was that sweet boy who promised to take care of her when she got old? She spent the first night at her friend Margaret's place just a few blocks away. Margaret, a widow like her, opened her arms and her door without questions. In the cold early hours, sharing the living room couch with a thin blanket, Elizabeth couldn't stop thinking about her grandchildren. Were they hungry? Was anyone making sure they brushed their teeth before bed? "You can't keep suffering like this, Elizabeth," Margaret said over breakfast, serving buttered bread and strong black coffee. "That daughter-in-law of yours was always a witch, I could tell. But he's my son, Margaret. How could he let this happen? A man controlled by his wife becomes a doormat. You know that." Margaret knew other women who had gone through the same thing. Elderly abandonment by their own families had become common in that part of the city. During the day, while Margaret worked as a seamstress, Elizabeth wandered the neighborhood aimlessly, watching life go by. It was on one of these walks that she ran into Mrs. Hope, a 68-year-old woman who attended the same church. Hope told her she'd also been kicked out by her family and now lived in a community shelter run by the local church. "There are other women like us there, dear," Hope explained, adjusting her shawl over her shoulders. "It's not the Waldorf Astoria, but it's a roof and hot meals. And most importantly, dignity." At the shelter, Elizabeth heard stories even sadder than hers. Mrs. Louise had been abandoned after her husband passed, and her children sold the family home to split the money. Mrs. Carmen had been forcibly placed in a psychiatric clinic by her niece, who wanted to keep her pension. They all had one thing in common. They had dedicated their lives to their families and were cast aside when they needed love the most. "The problem is, we raised our children thinking they'd take care of us," Mrs. Louise philosophized during the community dinner. "But we forgot to teach gratitude." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, continuing. Elizabeth Johnson secured a spot at the shelter and shared a small room with Mrs. Carmen. It was simple but clean. A bed, a shared wardrobe, and a window overlooking a garden where some of the elderly women planted flowers. For the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. The shelter ran on donations and volunteer work. A young lawyer named Patricia Williams visited weekly to help the women with legal matters. When she heard Elizabeth's story, she was outraged. "You have rights, Mrs. Johnson," Patricia explained, adjusting her glasses. "Elder abandonment is a crime. We can sue your son and daughter-in-law." "I don't want to sue my own son, doctor." But at least we can ensure he continues paying your alimony. You took care of the house and grandchildren for years. That has value." Elizabeth refused any legal action against Michael. As hurt as she was, she couldn't bear the thought of seeing her son in court. Patricia respected her decision, but made it clear she'd be available if Elizabeth changed her mind. The weeks passed slowly at the shelter. Elizabeth settled into a routine, waking early, helping in the communal kitchen, joining craft activities and walking in the garden. In the afternoons, she sat on the porch watching the street, always hoping to see Michael or the grandchildren coming for her. It was during one of these afternoons that an unexpected visit came. Emily and Ethan came running through the shelter gate, followed at a distance by Michael. The children threw themselves into her arms, crying and talking all at once. "Grandma, Mom won't let us see you," Emily sobbed. "She said you left because you didn't love us anymore," added Ethan, his eyes swollen from crying. "That's not true, my darlings. Grandma loves you more than anything in this world." Michael approached, his face filled with shame. He had lost weight and had deep circles under his eyes. He greeted his mother with a nod, unable to meet her gaze. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, son." The silence between them was heavy as a stone. Michael glanced around, clearly uncomfortable with the shelter's environment. Elizabeth noticed him judging her new reality, as if she had chosen to be there. "The kids begged to see you," he finally said. "Jennifer didn't want to let them, but..." "But what, Michael?" "She's been having some issues at work. She's more stressed." Elizabeth didn't buy the excuse. Jennifer always found reasons to justify her cruelty. She cherished the time with her grandchildren, listening to their stories and learning how they were being cared for. What she heard deeply worried her. "Mom gets really mad when we ask about you," Emily whispered. "Yesterday she smashed a plate in the kitchen and yelled it was our fault. And she doesn't make that pasta you taught her anymore," Ethan said. "She just buys ready-made food from the store. Michael only let them stay an hour." When they left, Elizabeth felt her heart shatter again. Watching her grandchildren walk out the gate was like losing pieces of herself. That night, in her shelter room, she broke down in tears. Mrs. Carman tried to comfort her, but no words could heal such a deep wound. That's when Elizabeth Johnson made a decision that would change everything. She remembered something she had long forgotten. Before moving into Michael's house, she and her late husband Anthony had lived for 40 years in a modest little home in Brooklyn. When Anthony passed away 5 years ago, she sold the house and used part of the money to help Michael pay off his apartment. But she had stored some personal belongings in a storage unit. Among them was an old safe that had belonged to Anthony. She had never been able to open it because she didn't know the combination. Anthony had been a private man when it came to finances, always saying he handled the important paperwork and that she didn't need to worry. The next day, Elizabeth asked for help from Patricia Williams, her lawyer. She explained about the safe and said she needed to go to the storage unit to retrieve some personal documents. "Of course, Mrs. Johnson. I can take you there in the late afternoon." The storage unit was at a facility in Queens. Elizabeth paid a small monthly fee to keep her things there. When she opened the small room, a wave of nostalgia washed over her. There were furniture, photographs, clothes, and memories of an entire life. The safe was exactly where she remembered, tucked under some old blankets. It was heavy and had a numerical combination she had never been able to figure out. Patricia suggested they take the safe to a specialized locksmith. "These old safes sometimes have obvious combinations," explained the locksmith, a middle-aged man named John. "Birth dates, anniversaries, things like that. They tried several combinations. Elizabeth's birth date, her wedding date, Michael's birth date. Nothing worked. Then Elizabeth remembered something. "Try my late husband's birth date," she said. John entered the numbers 0315 and 1952. The safe emitted a soft click and the door opened. What they found inside left all three of them speechless. There were yellowed documents, old photographs, and at the bottom some papers with bank account numbers and codes Elizabeth didn't understand. "Mrs. Johnson," said Patricia, examining the documents carefully. "This looks like information about very old investments." Among the papers were notes in Anthony's handwriting about gold purchases he had made over the years. Apparently, whenever there was extra money, he bought small amounts of gold as a form of savings. The documents showed deposits in different bank vaults, always in small amounts to avoid drawing attention. "My husband never told me about this," murmured Elizabeth, still in shock. "He probably wanted it to be a surprise for your retirement," said Patricia. "Or maybe an inheritance to leave for your son." The next day, Patricia accompanied Elizabeth to the first bank mentioned in the documents. It was a branch in the city centre, in one of those old buildings that had been around for decades. The manager, a young man named Frank, was initially skeptical. "You have to understand these documents are very old," Frank explained, adjusting his tie nervously. "We'd need to verify whether the accounts still exist and if the funds are still available." But when he checked the system, his expression changed completely. His eyes widened, and he excused himself to call his supervisor. Minutes later, the bank's general manager came out personally to assist Elizabeth. "Ma'am," said the general manager, a man in his 50s with graying hair, "do you have any idea how much money is deposited here?" "No idea. My husband never told me about this." The manager turned the computer screen toward her. The gold investments Anthony had made over decades, with compound interest and the metal's appreciation, now totaled over $2 million. Elizabeth Johnson felt her legs go weak. Patricia Williams held her arm to keep her from falling. It was impossible. She had lived her entire life with financial struggles, counting pennies to make it through the month, and now she discovered she was a millionaire. "There must be some mistake," she murmured. "There's no mistake, ma'am. Your husband was very smart. Gold is one of the safest investments out there, and he bought when the price was very low. But there was a problem. To withdraw such large sums, the bank required the presence of legal heirs and some additional documents. Elizabeth would need Michael's signature, as he was her only direct heir. The revelation sent a whirlwind of emotions through her. On one hand, she was relieved to know she'd never struggle again. On the other, she knew this discovery would completely change her relationship with Michael and Jennifer. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Patricia advised her to think carefully before revealing the inheritance to the family. Knowing Jennifer's personality, the news was likely to bring more problems than solutions. "Money can change people, Mrs. Johnson," the lawyer warned as they had coffee at a bakery near the bank. "Especially those who've already shown their true colors." Elizabeth spent days agonizing over what to do. Part of her wanted to keep it secret and use the money to rebuild her life, away from the family that had rejected her. Another part felt she should give Michael a chance to redeem himself. She decided to start by making smaller withdrawals to test the process. With Patricia's help, she managed to withdraw $20,000 without needing Michael's signature. It was nearly 2 years' worth of her retirement income. With that money, she rented a small but comfortable apartment in Greenwich Village, close to the shelter where she had stayed. It was a simple place, 1 bedroom, a living room, kitchen and bathroom, but it was clean and well located. For the first time in months, she would have her own home again. Her friends at the shelter were happy for her, but also sad to see her go. Elizabeth promised to keep visiting and helping whenever she could. Mrs. Carmen, her old roommate, cried on moving day. "You've been a blessing in my life, Elizabeth," Carmen said, hugging her tightly. "I hope you'll be very happy." "You've been a blessing in mine too, Carmen, and don't worry, I'll keep coming by every week." Elizabeth furnished the apartment simply but warmly. She bought a comfortable bed, a small dining table, an armchair for reading, and a television. In the back room, which could serve as an office, she set up a special corner with photos of her grandchildren and mementos of her life with Anthony. For the first few weeks, she relished her newfound freedom. She walked around the neighborhood, visited cafes, museums, and parks. For the first time in decades, her decisions were entirely her own. She didn't have to explain herself to anyone about where she went or what she did. But the ache of missing her grandchildren never faded. Every night before bed, she looked at their photos and wondered if they were okay, if they'd done their homework, if they were being cared for with love. Then, She finally mustered the courage to call Michael. The phone rang several times before he answered. "Hello? Michael, it's your mother." There was silence on the other end. She could hear the TV in the background and children's voices. "Mom? Hi, how are you?" "I'm fine, son. I managed to rent a small apartment nearby. I wanted to know if I can see the kids." "Oh, I don't know, Mom. Jennifer is still kind of, you know how she is." "Michael, they're my grandchildren. I have the right to see them." "I know, Mom, but things are complicated at home. Jennifer lost her job last month and is really stressed." Elizabeth Johnson felt a pang of sadness. Even knowing about the inheritance, her first instinct was concern for her family. Jennifer being unemployed meant more financial pressure on Michael, who worked as a computer technician at a small company. "Maybe I can help with something," she offered, without revealing the money. "No, Mom, we don't want your retirement savings. We've talked about this." The irony of the situation was almost comical. Here she was with $2 million in the bank, offering help to the family that had kicked her out because she was a financial burden. A few days later, she decided to show up at her grandchildren's school at pickup time. She knew Jennifer usually arrived late, so she'd have a few minutes to talk with Emily and Ethan. When the kids saw her, they ran over, shouting her name. The hug she received made up for all the pain of the last few months. "Grandma, where have you been?" Emily asked, gripping her hand tightly. "Grandma's living in a new place really close by." "Can we come visit you?" Ethan asked, his eyes full of hope. "Of course you can, sweetheart. Whenever Mom and Dad say it's okay." That's when Jennifer appeared. Seeing Elizabeth talking to her children, her face twisted in anger. "What are you doing here?" she shouted, drawing attention from other parents at the school gate. "I'm visiting my grandchildren, Jennifer." "You don't have the right to just show up unannounced. Kids, come here now." Emily and Ethan clung tighter to their grandmother, not wanting to let go again. The scene was drawing stares, and Jennifer, realizing she was being watched, tried to tone down her aggression. "Look, Mrs. Johnson," she said, changing her tone but keeping it cold. "It's not that I have anything personal against you, but the kids need to understand things have changed. You have your life now and we have ours. They're my grandchildren, Jennifer. That will never change. But you chose to leave. Now you have to accept the consequences." Elizabeth felt anger rising in her throat, but she took a deep breath. She didn't want to make a scene in front of the kids and other families. "I didn't choose to leave, Jennifer. I was kicked out, but that doesn't mean I'll give up on the children." Jennifer yanked the kids away, nearly hurting them. Emily started crying, and Ethan screamed that he wanted to stay with Grandma. The scene broke Elizabeth's heart, but she knew pushing further would only make things worse. "It's okay, my loves," she said, kneeling to their level. "Grandma will find a way for you to visit, all right? Be good and take care of each other." As Jennifer walked away with the kids, Elizabeth stood there, watching her grandchildren look back and wave until they disappeared around the corner. That night, alone in her apartment, she made a decision. It was time for Michael to know about the inheritance, not to buy her family's love, but to secure her rights to her grandchildren and to prove she wasn't a useless old woman, as Jennifer liked to say. The next day, she called Michael and asked to meet. She suggested a coffee shop at the mall near his house, neutral territory where Jennifer couldn't interfere. Michael showed up visibly nervous. He ordered a black coffee and kept stirring it without drinking, avoiding eye contact. "Mum, if this is about seeing the kids, I already told you." "Michael, stop. I need to tell you something important." Something in her tone made Michael look up. Elizabeth Johnson took a deep breath and told him about the discovery of the safe, about Anthony's investments, and about the $2 million in gold. At first, Michael didn't believe it. He thought his mother was imagining things or had fallen for some scam. It was only when she showed him the bank documents that he began to process the information. "Mom, is this real?" "It's very real, son. Your father spent decades saving this money. He probably wanted it to be a surprise for our old age." Michael stayed silent for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of the revelation. His mother, whom he had allowed to be kicked out of the house for being a financial burden, was actually a millionaire. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I only found out recently. and I wanted to see how you'd react." "My reaction? Mom, I didn't know." "You didn't know I had money, Michael. But you knew I was your mother. You knew I dedicated my life to you and your children. And yet you let your wife humiliate me and throw me out of the house." Michael hung his head, finally understanding the depth of his cowardice. He began to cry silently, remembering all the times his mother had sacrificed her own needs for the family. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I was a coward. Jennifer, she talks so much, pressures me so hard. Sometimes I can't think straight. Michael, marriage is a partnership, not a dictatorship. A wife who forces you to choose between her and your mother isn't a good wife. I know that now, but what can I do? The kids need stability, but they also need to learn the right values. The way things are, they're seeing that it's okay to discard people when we don't need them anymore." Elizabeth explained that she needed his signature to fully access the inheritance, but made it clear that this didn't mean he'd automatically have rights to the money. "This money is mine, Michael. Your father left it for me, but I need you as the legal heir for some bank procedures." "Of course, Mom, whatever you need. But there's a condition." Michael looked at her anxiously. "I want to see my grandchildren regularly. I want the right to be part of their lives, and I want you to stop being your wife's doormat." "Mom, I promise I'll change. I'll talk to Jennifer and explain that—" "No, Michael, you won't talk and explain. You'll decide. Either your family accepts me as part of your lives, or you'll have to choose between her and me. But this time, I won't be the only one losing out." The firmness in Elizabeth's voice surprised Michael. He wasn't used to seeing his mother so determined and self-assured. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. When Michael got home that afternoon, Jennifer immediately noticed something had changed. He was different, more serious, less submissive. "How was your visit with your mother?" she asked with a mocking tone. "Did she come to borrow money?" "Jennifer, we need to talk." Something in his voice made her put down her phone and pay attention. Michael told her about the inheritance, and Jennifer's initial reaction was the same as his had been: disbelief. "Michael, your mother's losing it. $2 million? What kind of story is that?" "I saw the documents, Jennifer, it's true." The silence that followed was heavy. Jennifer took a few minutes to process the information, and when she did, her expression changed completely. Where there had once been disdain, now there was greed. $2 million, she murmured. "And she said she needs your signature?" "She did." "Well, now I understand why she showed up at the school yesterday. She's trying to get close to the kids to manipulate us." "Jennifer, she's not trying to manipulate anyone. She just wants to see her grandchildren." "Michael, you're so naive. Old people get paranoid about money. She's probably thinking of leaving everything to some charity just to spite us." Jennifer's mind was already racing, calculating possibilities and strategies. $2 million would solve all the family's financial problems and still leave enough to fulfill dreams she thought were impossible. "You need to go there and apologize," she said, completely changing her tone. "Admit you were wrong and that you're sorry. Win back her trust." "Jennifer, it's not about the money." "Of course it's about the money, Michael. Do you think your mother would have the courage to stand up to us if she were still a poor retiree? Money changed her. Maybe the money gave her the courage to be who she always was." Jennifer didn't like that answer at all. She noticed Michael was questioning her authority for the first time in years, and it deeply unsettled her. "Fine," she said, forcing a smile. "I'll talk to the kids and explain they can visit Grandma on weekends." "Really?" "Of course. After all, family is family, right?" Michael was surprised by Jennifer's sudden change, but chose not to question it. Maybe she had truly reflected on her mistakes. The next day, Jennifer went to the most expensive florist in the neighborhood and bought a huge bouquet of red roses. She put on her best clothes and went to Elizabeth Johnson's apartment. When the doorbell rang, Elizabeth opened the door to find a completely different Jennifer, smiling, flowers in hand, even a hint of tears in her eyes. "Mrs. Johnson, I came here to apologize." Elizabeth kept the door slightly ajar, clearly suspicious. Apologize for what, Jennifer? For everything. For being unfair, for being cruel. I was going through a really tough time at work, and I took it out on you. I know that doesn't excuse it, but I want you to know I'm truly sorry. Jennifer's performance was convincing. She had rehearsed every word, every expression. Elizabeth, though wary, invited her in. The flowers are beautiful, thank you. Mrs. Johnson, I know I've never been the ideal daughter-in-law, but I want to change that. I want you back in our family. And what changed your mind about me, Jennifer? Your absence. When you left, I realized how much the boys missed you. And I realized how much I'd lost by not appreciating someone so special. Elizabeth wasn't naive. She knew Jennifer's change of heart was directly tied to the discovery of the money, but she decided to give her a chance, mostly for the grandchildren's sake. Jennifer, I accept your apology, but I need to make something clear. Some things have changed. What do you mean? I mean, I'm not that vulnerable woman who accepted any kind of treatment anymore. I have my own home now, my independence. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, it has to be with mutual respect. Of course, Mrs. Johnson, that's exactly what I want. Jennifer stayed at the apartment for almost 2 hours, complimenting the decor, asking about Elizabeth's new routine, and offering help with anything she needed. It was an almost perfect act. Mrs. Johnson, how about lunch tomorrow? I'd love to talk more and plan how we can include you in the boys' routine. That would be nice, Jennifer. When Jennifer left, Elizabeth sat in her armchair and reflected on the visit. Part of her wanted to believe in the change, but she knew Jennifer's nature too well to trust her completely. She decided to call Patricia and tell her what had happened. Mrs. Elizabeth, please be very careful, the lawyer warned. People like your daughter-in-law don't change overnight. She's probably planning something. I know, dear, but I have to try for my grandchildren's sake. I understand, but I suggest you be extremely cautious with any information about your money, and most importantly, don't sign anything without me reviewing it first. The next day, Jennifer showed up right on time for lunch. She had prepared an elaborate meal and even brought dessert. During the meal, she was attentive and affectionate, asking about Elizabeth Johnson's health and reminiscing about happy memories with the grandchildren. Mrs. Elizabeth, I was thinking, wouldn't you like to come live with us again? Elizabeth nearly choked on her food. What do you mean, Jennifer? Well, now that things have settled down, now that I've gotten my head straight, I think it would be good for all of us to have the family together again. Jennifer, I like my independence. Here I have my peace, my routine. But the boys miss you so much. And honestly, I admit I miss your help around the house. You always knew how to organize everything so well. There it was, the truth. Jennifer wanted the convenience of having a free babysitter and housekeeper again, but now with the added bonus of knowing Elizabeth had money. I'll think about it, Elizabeth replied diplomatically. And about those papers Michael mentioned, do you need help sorting out the banking matters? I already have an advisor, thank you. Jennifer tried to hide her frustration. She wanted more details about the inheritance, how much was available and how Elizabeth planned to use the money. In the following days, Jennifer intensified her campaign to win her back. She called Elizabeth daily, sent affectionate messages, and even brought the children to visit without Michael needing to mediate. During one of these visits, Emily and Ethan were playing in the bedroom when Jennifer took the opportunity to probe Elizabeth about her plans. Mrs. Elizabeth, have you thought about making some investments with this inheritance? Why do you ask? Oh, it's just that Michael knows a very good broker who could help. Maybe make the money grow, you know, to secure the boys' future. The money is already well managed, thank you. But aren't you afraid of leaving everything in the bank? Sometimes it's better to diversify. Elizabeth realized Jennifer was fishing for information. It was clear she and Michael had already discussed how to convince her to invest the money in something they could control. Jennifer, I'll be direct with you. I know your change in behavior is about the money. Jennifer tried to protest, but Elizabeth cut her off. I'm not judging. It's natural for financial situations to influence relationships, but I want to make it clear. My money is mine. I may choose to help the family if I want, but no one is entitled to it. Of course, Mrs. Elizabeth, I would never think of... And one more thing. If we're going to rebuild our relationship, it has to be based on honesty. No more games or manipulation. Jennifer realized she had underestimated Elizabeth's intelligence. The older woman was much sharper and more determined than she had imagined. In the weeks that followed, a tense truce settled between them. Jennifer kept up the facade of the loving daughter-in-law, but Elizabeth could sense the falseness behind every gesture. It was during this time that Elizabeth decided to do something that would completely change the family dynamic. She sought out Patricia and asked for help drafting a will. "I want to make everything very clear about how my money should be used after I'm gone," she explained. "That's a wise decision, Mrs. Elizabeth. But I hope it's just a precaution and that you live many more years to enjoy your inheritance." The will Elizabeth Johnson prepared was carefully thought out. She left a significant portion to Michael, but on the condition that he demonstrate he's learned to value family. She set aside specific funds for her grandchildren's education, which could only be accessed for that purpose. And she created a fund to help abandoned elderly, managed by a reputable organization. But most importantly, she stipulated that if she were ever a victim of coercion, manipulation, or abuse by family members, all the money would go to charity. "Mrs. Johnson, that's very clever," praised Patricia Williams. "It ensures no one will try to harm you for personal gain." "Exactly. I want my family to love me for who I am, not for what I have." Over the next month, Elizabeth Johnson carefully observed Michael and Jennifer's behavior. Michael seemed genuinely remorseful and was making an effort to be a better son. Jennifer, on the other hand, kept up her act, but it was clear her patience was wearing thin. The situation reached a breaking point when Jennifer discovered Elizabeth had made a will. Michael casually mentioned it during a phone call, unaware it would trigger an outburst. "What do you mean she made a will?" Jennifer shouted as soon as Michael hung up. "Jennifer, lower your voice, the kids are sleeping." "Michael, don't you get it? If she made a will, it means she could leave everything to anyone, to charity, to strangers. Mum wouldn't do that to us. Your mother has changed, Michael. The money's gone to her head. She's getting back at us." Jennifer's paranoia grew by the day. She began imagining scenarios where Elizabeth would leave the entire inheritance to strangers just to spite them. The thought of being so close to $2 million and losing it drove her to desperation. That's when she made a decision that would change everything. She resolved to uncover the details of the will and, if necessary, take drastic measures to protect what she considered her rights. Jennifer started discreetly following Elizabeth, trying to find out where she kept important documents. She also began recording phone calls, hoping to capture something she could use as evidence that her mother-in-law was mentally unfit. But Elizabeth was no fool. She realized she was being watched and decided it was time to take definitive action. One Thursday morning, she called Michael and asked to meet again, this time with Jennifer present. "I need to talk to both of you about my plans for the inheritance." Michael was anxious, but agreed. Jennifer, however, saw this as the opportunity she'd been waiting for. Maybe she could convince Elizabeth to make the money more accessible to the family. The meeting was set at Elizabeth's apartment. When Michael and Jennifer arrived, she had already prepared coffee and cookies, creating a seemingly welcoming atmosphere. "Please, have a seat," she said, gesturing to the couch. Jennifer was visibly nervous, fidgeting with her hands and glancing around as if assessing the value of the furniture. "Well, as you know, I discovered a significant inheritance my late husband left behind. And I know it's changed our family dynamic." Michael opened his mouth to speak, but Elizabeth gently interrupted. "Let me finish, son. First, I want you both to know I've made a will. Not because I plan on leaving soon, but because it's the responsible thing for anyone with assets to do." Jennifer shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Second, I want you to understand this money isn't a guarantee of an automatic inheritance. It's my money, and I'll use it as I see fit while I'm alive." "Of course, Mom. No one is questioning that," said Michael. "Third, and most importantly, I found out I'm being watched." The silence in the room was deafening. Jennifer turned pale while Michael looked confused. "What do you mean, Mom?" "Someone has been following me, Michael. Someone has been trying to learn my habits, where I go, who I talk to, and I'm sure that person is in this room." Jennifer tried to protest, but her voice came out shaky. "Mrs. Elizabeth, you're being paranoid. Who would follow you?" "You, Jennifer." The direct accusation caught Jennifer off guard. She tried to deny it, but Elizabeth Johnson was prepared. "Do you think I didn't notice your sudden change in behavior? Do you think I didn't catch your questions about banks, investments, wills? Do you think I didn't see you standing on the corner watching when I leave the house?" Michael stared at his wife with growing horror. "Jennifer, is this true?" I was just worried about her safety," Jennifer stammered. "Lies," Elizabeth said coldly. "You're worried about the money, and that shows me your change in behavior was completely fake." Jennifer's mask finally fell. The anger she had been holding back for weeks exploded. "Fine. Yes, I want to know about the money. Do you think it's fair to show up with $2 million after making us believe you were some poor old woman?" "Jennifer," Michael shouted. "No, Michael, I'm going to speak." Jennifer stood up, gesturing violently. "We supported her for years. I supported her. I took care of her house, put up with her quirks, let her raise my kids her way." "No one asked you to support me," Elizabeth replied calmly, "and as I recall, I was the one taking care of the house and the children." "But who paid the bills? Who bought the food? Who covered your medicine? The same couple who now found out I have more money than you and completely changed their attitude." The argument escalated quickly. Jennifer started shouting accusations, saying Elizabeth was getting revenge on the family, that she was manipulating the situation to humiliate them. "You planned all this," Jennifer screamed. "You played the victim to make us feel guilty, and now you want to act like the rich martyr." "Jennifer, stop," Michael tried to intervene, but she was out of control. "No, I won't stop. This manipulative old woman thinks she can play games with us. $2 million, Michael. $2 million she hid from us." "I hid nothing," Elizabeth said, keeping her cool. "I found out recently and I shared it with you. More than that, I offered help." "You offered crumbs." Jennifer was red with rage. "You want us to beg, to grovel at your feet." It was then that Michael finally found his voice. "Enough," he shouted, startling both women. "Enough, Jennifer. You're acting like a mad woman." "Michael, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Michael stood up, shaking with anger. "I understand that my wife kicked my mother out because she was a financial burden. I understand that now that you've found out she has money, you want to pretend nothing happened. She was costing us money. Don't you remember the debts?" "What debts, Jennifer? What debts that you never properly explained to me?" Elizabeth watched the argument in silence, finally seeing Michael confront his wife. It was painful, but necessary. "Michael, you're being manipulated by her." Jennifer pointed at Elizabeth. "She's using the money to tear our family apart." "Our family was already torn apart the moment you forced me to choose between you and my mother," Michael replied with a clarity that surprised even himself. "And I chose wrong." "Michael." "No, Jennifer. You've shown me who you really are. And I allowed you to treat my mother like trash." Jennifer realized she was losing control of the situation. In desperation, she played her last card. "Fine, if that's how you want it, I'm leaving. But I'm taking the kids with me." "You're not," Michael said firmly. "What do you mean I'm not? They're my daughters. They're our daughters. And they won't grow up watching their mother treat their grandmother the way you did." Elizabeth Johnson watched her son's marriage collapse with mixed feelings. On one hand, she was proud that Michael had finally found the courage to stand his ground. On the other, she knew this would bring painful consequences for everyone, especially the grandchildren. Jennifer stormed out of the apartment, slamming the door and shouting threats. Michael stayed behind, collapsing onto the couch with his head in his hands. "Mum, what have I done?" "You did what you should have done a long time ago, son." "But what about the kids? What if she really tries to take them from me?" "Michael, we'll handle this together." But you needed to understand that a marriage built on fear and manipulation isn't a marriage at all. In the weeks that followed, the family situation exploded completely. Jennifer hired a lawyer and filed for divorce and sole custody of the children. She claimed Michael had suffered parental alienation due to Elizabeth Johnson's influence and was unfit to care for them. But as the case unfolded, other truths came to light. Michael's lawyer discovered Jennifer had racked up significant debts from online gambling, something she'd hidden from her husband. There was also evidence she'd tried to access Elizabeth Johnson's bank information without permission. "Your case is very strong, Michael," the lawyer said. "Your wife was clearly only interested in your mother's money, and her actions prove it." During this turbulent time, Elizabeth Johnson became the emotional support Michael needed. She helped with lawyers, cared for the grandchildren when they stayed with their father, and showed Michael that real family stands by you in tough times. The children, initially confused by their parents' separation, slowly began to understand they'd gotten their grandmother back. Emily and Ethan spent weekends at Elizabeth Johnson's apartment, where she turned the back room into a special space for them. "Grandma, are you going to live with us again?" Emily asked one Sunday afternoon. "No, sweetheart, Grandma likes her little home, but you can visit whenever you want." "And you won't leave again?" "Never again, my princess. Grandma learned she has to fight for the people she loves." Throughout the divorce proceedings, Elizabeth Johnson used part of her inheritance wisely. She helped Michael hire good lawyers, ensured the children had counseling to cope with the separation, and started setting aside money in a special account for their education. She also made sure to stay in touch with her friends from the shelter. Every week she brought sweets, helped with small medical expenses, and offered advice to those going through tough family situations. "Mrs. Johnson, you're an angel," Mrs. Carmen said during one visit. "How many people who come into money remember their poor friends?" "Carmen, I didn't win the lottery. I just realized I've always had worth. I just didn't know it." The divorce dragged on for nearly a year, but in the end, Michael won shared custody. Jennifer received fair alimony, but her plans to benefit from Elizabeth Johnson's inheritance had failed completely. At the final hearing, when the judge announced the decision, Jennifer glared at Elizabeth Johnson with a mix of hatred and defeat, but the older woman simply smiled calmly, knowing she hadn't won because of money, but because of dignity. With the legal situation resolved, Michael began rebuilding his life. He moved to a smaller but comfortable apartment near his mother's. For the first time in years, he could make his own decisions without fear of retaliation. "Mom, I want to apologize again," he said one evening as they were having dinner together with the kids. "I was a coward and I almost lost the most important person in my life. Michael, the past is in the past. What matters is that we've learned from our mistakes. Even so, I need you to know how deeply sorry I am, and I promise I'll never let anyone treat you badly again." Elizabeth Johnson smiled, seeing the sincerity in her son's eyes that she had missed for so long. With her emotional stability restored, Elizabeth began making plans to use her inheritance meaningfully. Beyond securing her grandchildren's future and helping Michael when needed, she wanted to create something to honor Anthony's memory. She decided to establish a permanent fund to help abandoned seniors. She worked with Patricia Williams to create a foundation that would offer not just shelter, but also legal and psychological support for elderly people facing difficult family situations. "Your husband would be proud," Patricia said as they reviewed the foundation's paperwork. "He saved this money his whole life, and now it's going to help so many people." "Anthony always said, 'Money only has value when used to do good,'" Elizabeth recalled. "I think he'd be happy knowing his savings are changing lives." The foundation started small, serving just a few women from the shelter where Elizabeth had stayed, but it gradually grew, offering services like family mediation, free legal aid, and even temporary housing for vulnerable seniors. At the official opening of the foundation, 2 years after discovering the inheritance, Elizabeth gave an emotional speech. "When I found out my husband had saved this money for decades, my first reaction was surprise. How did he manage it without me noticing? But then I understood. Anthony was always a forward-thinking man, always planning for the future." Michael sat in the audience with his grandchildren, smiling proudly at his mother. Today, using the fruit of his hard work and dedication, we're creating something bigger than just one family. We're building a support network for people who, like me, have learned that biological family isn't always real family. After the event, as Michael helped put away chairs, Emily ran up to her grandmother. "Grandma, when I grow up, can I work at your foundation?" "Of course, sweetheart." But first, you'll need to study hard to learn how to help people. I will. I want to be just like you when I grow old. Elizabeth laughed, hugging her granddaughter. You don't have to grow old to be special, Emily. You already are. Years passed, and Elizabeth's life settled into a happy, productive routine. She kept her own apartment, but spent much of her time with Michael and the grandchildren. The foundation grew, serving dozens of seniors each month. Michael found love again, a woman named Sarah, a nurse who admired Elizabeth's dedication to helping the elderly. Sarah treated her mother-in-law with genuine warmth, and the grandchildren naturally accepted her as part of the family. It's funny how life works, Elizabeth remarked to Sarah during a Sunday lunch. When I found the money, I thought it would solve all my problems, but really it just gave me the courage to face the ones I already had. The money didn't change who you are, Mrs. Johnson. It just revealed who you've always been. Jennifer, meanwhile, struggled to rebuild her life after the divorce. She tried to get close to the children several times, but they had learned to see through her manipulations. Eventually, she moved to another city and gradually reduced contact with the family. During one of Jennifer's last visits, when she came to pick up the kids to spend a holiday with them, she ran into Elizabeth Johnson in the lobby of Michael's building. "Mrs. Johnson," she said, clearly uncomfortable. "Jennifer," Elizabeth replied politely. There was a moment of silence between them. Jennifer seemed to want to say something but couldn't find the words. I wanted you to know I don't hold any grudges against you," she finally said. "I know, Jennifer, and neither do I. Things could have been different if we had been different people," Elizabeth finished. "But we weren't, and that's okay." Jennifer nodded and walked away. It was likely the last conversation they would ever have. On a winter night, almost 5 years after discovering the inheritance, Elizabeth was in her favorite armchair, reading a book and waiting for Michael and her grandchildren to arrive for dinner. She looked around her apartment, simple but cozy, filled with photographs and happy memories. She thought about everything that had happened since that terrible morning when she was thrown out of her home. The pain of rejection still hurt sometimes, but it had been transformed into something productive. Discovering the money had only been the catalyst for changes that needed to happen. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. "Grandma?" It was Ethan's voice, now 15. "We're on our way up. Dad brought pizza." "I'll be waiting, sweetheart." When she heard the keys in the door and the cheerful voices filling the apartment, Elizabeth smiled. She had family, she had purpose, she had dignity. The money was there, safe in the bank, securing her future and the future of those she loved. But what truly made her rich was knowing she had found the strength to fight for herself when she needed it most. Emily, now 13, ran to hug her. "Grandma, guess what? I got the highest grade in my class on my essay." "What did you write about, Princess?" "About everyday heroes. I wrote about you." Elizabeth felt her eyes well up. She hugged her granddaughter tighter, knowing the greatest legacy she would leave wasn't the gold stored in the bank, but the values and courage she had taught the generations that would come after her. Michael walked into the living room with the pizza boxes, Sarah by his side with a warm smile. "Mom, how was your day at the foundation?" "Productive. We helped another woman reconcile with her son. A story like ours, but with a happy ending from the start." "You're an inspiration, Mrs. Johnson," Sarah said, setting the table. "No, dear. I'm just a woman who learned it's never too late to start over." As the family gathered around the table, Elizabeth looked at each beloved face and felt a deep peace. She had suffered, she had been rejected, she had endured moments of profound loneliness. But she had also discovered her own strength, reclaimed her dignity, and most importantly, she had turned her pain into love. The money was still there, in the bank vaults, growing and ensuring security. But the real wealth was right there at that table, in her grandchildren's laughter, in her son's affection, in Sarah's genuine friendship, and in the certainty that she had found her place in the world again. Elizabeth Johnson raised her glass of juice for a toast. "To family," she said, looking at everyone. "To the real family, the one you choose and build every day." "To Grandma," they all replied in unison, raising their glasses. And on that winter night, In a simple apartment in Greenwich Village, a 77-year-old woman proved that true love and dignity are the only legacies that really matter. The end of the story. So, what did you think of this incredible story of overcoming adversity? Do you think Elizabeth Johnson made the right decisions? Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. And if you know any similar stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories.